Okay, and Darryl, I think that's recording now. So just a quick welcome to anybody who's actually watching today's webinar post, which has been recorded. Big welcome to Darryl Smith from Easy Apps. Those who have not met Darryl before, Darryl is the owner of an app company, and the reason why we've asked him to speak last night was his experience of running big teams globally at British Telecom a few years ago. So the whole purpose of last night's webinar was working with, or how to, tips and techniques of working remotely in a very successful way. There were a number of things we brought up last night. One thing we did figure out, we had a small technical issue that I forgot to press the record button. So I thought it'd be a good idea to interview Darryl today to run through the main points that we actually had. So anybody who couldn't make last night, obviously get advantage from it. So Darryl, welcome on board. Great to see you.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you.
So how do you think last night went before we obviously run through some of the things there? We had a number of questions. What were your take on that?
Well, I think it's interesting to see how all of us, no matter what of our experience in terms of remote working, how we're adapting to the current situation. Because even though I'd like to think myself in the kind of the camp of people that are quite experienced with remote working, I've never had to do remote working in a complete lockdown, and yep. It's a whole different level where absolutely everybody is on the end of a camera rather than small teams being on the end of a camera. But it's really encouraging to see people sharing ideas and kind of thinking about how they can adapt their business and use the technology.
Absolutely great. I mean, the other thing I picked up from last night as well is that while a lot of us, me included, are very, very new to this way of working, there was actually a practice element of what we were trying to encourage as well. So it was great seeing people use the various functionalities of Zoom. They were playing around with backgrounds and you can see different things. It was great to see, who was it? It was Pierre, obviously get a gin and tonic and a kiss from his wife. And then Lee suddenly disappeared when his wife walked through the door and was like, oh, hang on a second, what's going on? But people started to pick up the etiquette as well. I felt people started to get the hang of it. Is that a fair comment to make?
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the calls I was on this morning, you could see people taking it to the next level. So they had a background with their company logos and stuff. So, you know, it's interesting to see, you know, just with a laptop sitting at home, how you can really create a professional background, even though you might be sitting in your kitchen. You know.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, us personally, we've tried to recreate places in Venice, etc., with the marble type structures
and the clear canals. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's a good thing that we've done that. So for the purpose of those who didn't see last night, I'm quickly just going to share the agenda that we was going to run through and explain the reason why we're running these videos. So bear with us on there, because obviously we are still quite new to the technology. Here we go. So this was the agenda from last night. So we want to do a very quick update of why we actually do this, and obviously welcome people there. We did have an introduction part where we asked people just to give their name and business and what they do very, very quickly, and obviously we move straight over to yourself. But for any members who are watching this and actually wondering why are we planning to run so many events, a lot of it is down to the reaction that people have actually had so far. We, in general, in regards to the COVID-19 crisis, there's a lot of businesses are feeling very, very isolated. I'm sure you'll agree with this, Darryl, obviously, when we've had conversations, you spoke to other businesses as well. So we're trying to run as many things face-to-face in this kind of format to get information going. We feel that if people can share things properly, that it obviously works. And also it's a good way to build connections as well. Obviously, we met networking. And obviously it's a virtual form of networking as well. We found by talking to members, business opportunities have come about. Have you noticed that as well? I mean, you probably had a BNI meeting online earlier today. Was that right, Darryl?
Yeah, absolutely. So networking is still going strong. Obviously, some businesses are unaffected by this completely. Other businesses, their revenues fallen off a cliff overnight. So certainly using these tools, using these remote way of working, you know, you can continue to support each other and try and do what you can to help those businesses where their revenues disappeared.
Absolutely. I mean, we found different opportunities because some people are obviously taking advantage almost of a little bit of downtime as such. So they are working on the business rather than always in the business. And we've certainly found some opportunities there. And you've already mentioned the community support. It's important as a community, a business community, not just BSO, but the general business community obviously works together as much as they can. The other side as well, we found that from a mental well-being perspective, people are just not used to working from home. I work from home, but staring at the same four walls all day, every day is driving people potty. Absolutely mad. So being able to see other people is obviously one there. And also we're trying to encourage routine. I think you covered part of this as well, that when you start doing preparation work, etc. Routine is very, very, very important to any working day. And the other reason we're running so many webinars is so we can actually get people practicing online, because there's very much a protocol. I know you'll cover some of that in a second when we go to the various slides. And the other one is, I finally was just ideas. Some of the ideas some of the members are coming out with are absolutely fantastic. Some are crazy, but some are brilliant. And that's what we're looking to do. So that was just a very, very quick overview. And for anybody who hasn't looked at the email, that's our events and webinar schedule over the coming 4 weeks. So if anybody wants to screenshot that off this video, that'd be great. So Daryl, I'm going to move into your presentation now, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to add anything else to the agenda that we obviously had last night? We was having a general discussion with members as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that at all?
No, I think that's fine. I think we should just crack on.
In that case, that makes life a lot easier. Here we go. Right. So we've pulled up your presentation here. So we can go through screen by screen if that's okay. I've got my notes from last night as well. And if you'd just like to explain hang on a second, do I have to click it? No, I have to scroll it up. Here we go. So just explain your background of why we actually asked you this in the first place to do this presentation last night.
Yeah, of course, Brett. And I think you mentioned a little bit of this earlier, but I've been running my own business now for just over a year. And before that, I actually spent 25 years working in BT, which, as most people probably know, is quite a large global organization. The figures vary, but when you look at kind of direct and full-time subcontractors, we're looking at about 130,000 people globally. Okay. My personal experience was running an IT team of circa 2,000 people, and that was across the UK and India. Only about 70 people in the UK, most of the people in India, but involved generally quite a lot of travel, quite a lot of time online. And then we used to go through regular periods where we used to have travel bans within BT, or even travel restrictions. Travel bans, yes. So this is when our expenses budget became overspent for the year and people would stop being able to travel. So they're either just at their home, if they work from home, or at their kind of local office. Okay. And obviously, a lot of our projects involved team working across the globe. So remote working was a really key part of our kind of day-to-day life.
And how long ago was this, Darryl? Was this years ago or quite recently? I know that you obviously started running your own business about a year ago now.
Yes. So in fact, in my final year in BT, about half of that year, there was travel restrictions imposed.
Right. Okay.
So we were doing it in the kind of the times where the tools that are available now were the tools available then.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So here we go. So obviously this is an interesting slide we threw up, and it was actually really, really good to actually hear this to start off with. So just explain what you were talking about when you were talking about that everybody hasn't got a ready-made working, not everyone has a ready-made work environment at home.
Okay, so part of the rules of kind of home working, especially when I was in BT, is that you only really allowed to work from home if you had a desk space and dedicated space where you could shut yourself away. Obviously, with the situation that people are facing within the lockdown, that isn't always the case, you know. So I'm very lucky. I've got a dedicated place to work at home, a dedicated room. This is my man den. I've got all of my stuff around here as well. I've got a desk. I've got desk lamps. So everything's great. Other people are at home, kids are at home, they don't have a spare room to work in. And therefore, they are tucked away in a corner of one of the rooms or on the kitchen table. And the kind of thing I was just really talking about with people is try and make the best that you can with the space available. So, if you haven't got a dedicated room, make a dedicated space. And there are little things that you can do. You were taking the mick out of me yesterday, Brett, for my headset here.
I
But
think I'm glad you're not wearing Captain Scarlet shirt today as well. That's
so, but the headsets do serve a purpose, especially this one, which has kind of a double earphone, because it cuts out background noise. And even though I'm very easily distracted, so even if I'm in my own space, it helps. But for people who are having to work at home with family around, I would really recommend getting a headset, because it allows you to kind of zone out and focus on the task in hand.
absolutely. I think it was great to see last night, obviously, where we could see multiple people in multiple environments. I mean, obviously, I work from home, and to be fair, I work predominantly from the dining room table, and I'm very much in that camp. But seeing the multitude of places what people actually had, and seeing various things going on, that I think it's an important point that people haven't got to be afraid of this, even if they have got to sit at the dining room table, on the sofa, wherever it is, just be part of it.
And there was actually a really good example on our BNI online call this morning, because there was one guy. He was a visitor. He's not a regular member. He's a builder, and he was doing it from the back of his van, basically because he had a house full of kids. He had all the family, and it was the only quiet space he had. But he made the best of this kind of a situation, and went and found himself some kind of quiet space to actually do the call.
Fantastic! I love it. So, okay, moving on to the next part, you were talking about your key considerations, and this is where you started getting to the more of the nitty gritty of webinars, etc. So, before we go into your top tips, if you just explain obviously what you were talking about here.
Yeah. So what I ran through here, the four things I really look at when I'm thinking about the best way to do remote working. The first two are all about the people, and the people side is actually the hardest side here. The reason a lot of us travel, the reason a lot of us have face-to-face communication is because, one, we prefer it, and secondly, it's a warmer type of communication. It enables us to focus on kind of building relationships, working on engagement with people, as well as getting the job done. And certainly in my experience, it's one of the hardest things to kind of replicate when you're doing remote working. So firstly, for those people with businesses who have employees, if people are used to working in a central office environment and now everybody's working from home, how do you get the kind of employee engagement, satisfaction, and how do you keep that going?
Of course.
And then secondly, customer engagement and supplier management. Certainly within my job, most of my customer engagement is face-to-face. I build websites and mobile apps for local businesses. I go and sit down with the local businesses, understand how they work, share the designs with them, do demos for them. And then I come home and I actually kind of build the apps. But most of my customer and supplier management is done face-to-face. And certainly within BT, when we had the travel ban, that was the same as well. And I had to rapidly switch that to how do you best do that online.
Would I be thinking there then? A lot of this is about obviously doing webinars, using the virtual presence with an actual purpose, and obviously almost agreeing terms as such of what you're trying to achieve with things. Am I right of thinking that, rather than just a general chit chat? It's you're doing this for a reason. Is that, am I right in thinking there?
You are, and actually, it's one of the things I'll cover probably my first tip. Actually, Brett, is how you kind of structure your communication and engagement plan to focus on the people side as well as getting the job done.
So you've got two things before we move on to that. You've mentioned here about working as a team to get the job done, and also you're talking about feedback as well. Can you just quickly, obviously, reiterate those for those who wasn't on the webinar last night?
Yeah, so certainly, as well as the people, the idea of remote working is there's still work to be done,
Yep.
and work that has to be done on time and to the right quality. And particularly if that kind of work involves kind of a few team members contributing,
Uh-huh.
what is the best way to do that? How do you allocate work? How do you make sure that people know how and when to ask for help when's
Okay.
needed? And finally, constantly asking for feedback. We were talking about this earlier, kind of offline, Brett. I think one of the more difficult things with online working is the lack of kind of body language feedback.
Yep.
Video
Yep.
goes some way to addressing that, but sometimes it's difficult to judge the level of engagement that is far more
Of
intuitive when you're face to face. So
course.
make space within your online communications to get feedback from people, because you will need to kind of iterate and adjust the approach.
Absolutely brilliant. So if we go, I think, to your first tip now, and I think this is really, really good. It did create some people a little bit of confusion, but I think it's a really, really important point to cover across. So if you want to go through your tip one, first of all.
Yeah. So I think the key thing, Brett, with and it's probably not just the fact that you're doing online work, and it's any change to the way that you have to work, is you
Absolutely.
probably have to introduce a kind of a level of discipline, because it's a level of discipline that will keep you sane and also help you kind of communicate some of the changes. And one of the things I used to do in BT, especially when we used to go into the travel bans, was first of all, I always created a communication and engagement plan. And then
Okay.
when environments and situations changes, it gives you a plan to kind of manage and adjust, and it enters that real kind of rigor and discipline.
Okay.
Now, now it all sounds very corporate and possibly very much over the top for some small businesses, but I'd really encourage everybody to do this because it is quite simple. A communication engagement plan is literally a list of ways you communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you can see from the example on the right there, this is a kind of a basic extract of one of my previous comms plans,
Yep.
where I list the type of communication, who the communication was with, how I went about doing it, what the frequency was, and really, really important, what the objective is of that communication. Because when you look at the objective of the communication, you can then establish what the right delivery method is. So in that communication plan that you can see, there may have been things on there before travel restrictions, which may have been face to face.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'd look, okay, these are the things I'm meeting face to face. This is the objective. This is the frequency. How do I adjust that to the most appropriate online
Basically,
solution?
to basically go through the same kind of exercise that you would have gone through before anyway, of do I need to free up time to actually have a face-to-face meeting? Do I need just to have a phone call? Is this a Skype call or a WhatsApp video message or whatever it may
Yeah.
be? Is it a letter? Is it smoke signals? Carrier pigeons, whatever it may be. It's just trying to find the right solution for the right problem. Effectively, is that correct? What we're thinking there?
Absolutely. And I think also writing it down, especially if you've got a team or you've got a
Yep.
large number of suppliers, you can actually
Okay.
share this with them and get their feedback on, you can say, this is how I'm intending for us to communicate as an organization or as a team. Have you got any feedback on this? And they may have some other suggestions
That's
themselves.
absolutely that's absolutely brilliant. So as we move on to your second tip, which was obviously about roles and obviously an etiquette. Some of these are common sense, but also some are even the common sense. People don't understand the reasons why. And we had a few instances yesterday where there was an alarm going off. I think Ralph's his wife had burnt the toast or something. Um, we had somebody sneezing, and then all of a sudden figured out it was actually them, so they actually muted themselves. So, do you want to quickly run through various roles and obviously the online etiquette for anybody who's completely new to this? It's
Yeah.
really obvious to me now that people who are experienced really know what they're doing, and they're constantly muting, unmuting, and you can see what they're doing straight off the back of it. So, if you want to quickly run through that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, top one, video wherever possible. Um,
Absolutely.
and and I've put wherever possible here because when you're in a situation where you've lost the ability to meet face to face. I
Yep.
think that by far the best way to maintain relationships and engagement is to see each other. You get some of the body language, not all of it, but it makes a whole. It's a whole different kind of playing field if people are on video.
Absolutely.
Secondly, as we've already discussed, headset I think is quite important. It helps you focus. But for those of us who have been on calls where there's a lot of people, it is really, really easy to kind of get feedback. And feedback is more easily picked up, or even interference, by laptop microphones and speakers rather than kind of headsets, especially a really kind of good quality headset.
We were looking at Amazon this morning trying to find some for me, because the only ones I've got are for my iPhone, and they don't fit my Mac. So
Yeah.
it's like, I'm unfortunately, I've figured out that the kids have actually stolen all of my old iPhone. Yeah, probably with some money as well, but that's my kids for you. But never mind.
And we know there's a few of our BSO members in the IT space, which I'm sure would be very, very happy to advise people on the most appropriate headset for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned here about chair, presenter, and conference coordinator.
Yeah, this is one of my favourites, because you so often see people trying to do all three at once on a conference call with quite a few people, and it always ends in some kind of comical farce, because you have someone
commenting about me here, is there or something?
No, not at all, Brett. No, not at all. But as we know, it's very difficult to kind of chair a group of people and coordinate it, present the content, and deal with the kind of, somebody almost policing it. So if somebody has failed to go on mute, and all of a sudden, their phone's going, and I've had this, they wander off around the room talking on another call, and it's just blasting over. You just need somebody on there to kind of mute them and to kind of facilitate, and watch for people hand coming up on the feature, and just generally kind of help from a technology point of view.
Okay.
Fixed running order and question slots, it probably is common sense, but and I'll cover a few of the other points here. One of the big problems with video conferencing is when people start interrupting or talking over each other, a lot of the actual voice channels just automatically cut off. It is actually quite difficult to have multiple conversations. So having that little bit more discipline about saying, so-and-so is going to present for 10 minutes, and then we will have a 5-minute question slot, and this is how the question slot will be coordinated.
Gotcha.
I think that's quite key. Probably the only other one I'd really like to highlight, Brett, and this is difficult for me. I know it's one of my kind of bad habits, is don't multitask. Yep. My danger is I have 2 screens here. So I'll be on an audio with you. Sometimes, and I shouldn't do this, I have my email up on the other one, and you'll see an email pop in that you've been waiting for, and your attention is drawn to that. If that happens, you might as well not be on the meeting. You might not be up as well on the online presence. So try not to multitask.
So in other words, just trying to use a similar kind of etiquette if you were doing a face-to-face meeting of things like taking whether you can still see me or not, I have no idea, but mobile phones, make sure they're off the table, etc. The standard etiquette you would normally do, treat a webinar, an online meeting exactly the same way as anything else.
Absolutely, Brett. And I think the key thing is that at the start of every meeting, especially if it's with a new audience, just run through the etiquette and almost kind of get that verbal contract with everybody to say, please don't multitask during this, turn off your phones. Can I have everybody's agreement to do that? Because then if you see people doing it, you can actually call them out and say, look,
you never find that with any BSO member, because they know the amount of humiliation and ridicule that would actually happen. It's terribly embarrassing, isn't it?
Humiliation is a very good policing technique, Brett. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we have got something right then. That's okay. We're actually good with that then. And just something else I want to go back to here is in regards to muting. I mean, obviously we're new to Zoom, especially. I know there's obviously many other different formats as well. Like go to webinar, and I think you mentioned Microsoft Teams, etc.
Yeah.
am I right in thinking that the thing that we've found is if you mute everybody apart from the chair and the presenter, and then leave people on mute unless they need to jump into that particular question and waiting for like a natural break normally. But if they want to ask a different question, then to use putting their hand up, etc., is probably a good way to police it. Is that a right way of thinking? Or
Absolutely, I find just sometimes I've seen some calls go ahead where they're relying on people to kind of just mute themselves at the start, and what you find is that 80% of people know how to do that, but 20% of people that don't know how to do that don't mute themselves, and all you can hear is kind of keys being pressed and rustling as they're trying to find the mute button. So it is more effective to kind of mute everybody, and then if you want to invite somebody in and they're struggling, at least it's easier to help them unmute, and then it's not kind of disrupting and there's not lots of background noise.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. It's something we've learned very, very quickly off the back of anybody who's watching this and afraid of actually running their own webinars. The faster you can learn that, it makes things so much easier to try and police it.
Well, one of the other things on that, Brett, just very quickly, and you did this last night, and I think this works very well, is that you can set up these conference calls to mute everybody on entry. I don't personally like that because even though you get a bit of kind of talking over and interruptions at the start, it doesn't really matter when it's 5 or 6 people joining and having a bit of a general chit chat about what's gone on that day. But as you say, then when you go into the formal part of the meeting, that's the time to mute all.
Absolutely. I think it's a really, really good point there. So going on to your point 3, obviously making time here for online. If only I could read. Actually, that's a good point. Where's my glasses gone? Actually, I'm actually quite lucky that I actually had my glasses a week before we basically been locked down. So here we go. So it is make time for online social interaction. Explain.
Yeah. So I just kind of really hinted at this at the end, is that we all enjoyed the face-to-face time, and what you need to do is you need to kind of replicate some of that social interaction online, and it's probably best explained with a couple of examples. Certainly within BT, like most corporates, we were used to some fairly long face-to-face meetings, all day team meetings with a break for lunch in the middle.
Don't you just love them? Don't you just love them?
Absolutely. And when we move to online, there's certain things that you miss, and the things that I missed about those kind of face-to-face team meetings is the little side conversations you have in the break, the funny stories that people kind of share over the sandwich that they're having for lunch, the fact that somebody brings donuts in for the meeting. These are the bits which help you kind of bond as a team.
Right.
And the things that are quite easily lost when you go online. So, a great thing to do is try and write those things down. What am I going to miss? And then think about how you can replicate them online. Right. So as one example, there used to be 2 or 3 people in my team, and we used to have a bit of a giggle and a laugh about certain things during the breaks at lunchtime, and even that kind of, subtle little kind of wink or smile during the meeting over something.
Right, okay.
We replicated that by, team meetings were on MS Teams, and you used to have a few little kind of side conversations and comments with people over WhatsApp. And whilst that might not sound very professional in one way, actually it was all part of the way our team bonded and operated. And so, we were quite able to kind of replicate that. Funny stories, we would then keep the video open during the half-hour kind of break for lunch. And people could go away from their desk and get lunch, but a lot of people just come back and you just have a general chat about, life and universe and all of that type of thing whilst you had that break.
Cool, fantastic. So I'm just conscious of your time, obviously, because we took a lot of your time last night and also coming back today as well, which is great. So you've also mentioned about obviously not being afraid of big numbers. You've just already mentioned about big teams and big team meetings you used to have. We've not had anything of that kind of size yet. I think our biggest so far is 25. But once again, he's saying don't be afraid of very large numbers.
Yeah, because it's manageable, and these tools are really good for managing large events as well as small events.
Okay.
So one example is that every quarter I used to run a team building event for my UK team, so about 70 people.
Okay.
And I wanted to do that when we couldn't travel. So we did it online, and we ran an event for a whole day. And that consisted of a bit of kind of light-hearted fun at the start, with various team members being selected at random to present their kind of personal profile, who they were, where they lived in the world, what their hobbies were, something unusual about them. And all of that information had been submitted in advance. So we had a slide for it, a profile slide for everybody, which we'd put up, and then we'd unmute the person and they'd have to kind of tell us a little bit about it. We then had plenary presentations. The tool we used had the ability for kind of breakout sessions. So you could get smaller teams working on a particular problem and then coming back into a main session. And actually that kind of, even though everybody's still on an online thing, it felt like people were still moving around, and it changed their interest.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
and then finishing it off with a social event, which was a quiz at the end.
Okay. So that's interesting. So we're probably going to post this onto the BSO Facebook group. Oops, sorry, hang on.
What a great example, Brett.
Absolutely. So
online
actually,
etiquette.
It is actually on silent, but I forgot that my phone is hooked up to the speaker, and it actually plays through the speaker. So never mind. What we'll do? Give me 1 second. I'm going to turn the speaker off. That's probably the safest way to do it. Here we go. So I think the next slide says about technology, doesn't it? So there's always mistakes somewhere. Here we go.
Yeah.
So in terms of having some fun, so what I was about to mention there, because I've been thinking about how can we run a quiz or something. I think this is probably a good point for anybody who's actually taken the time to listen to this webinar so far. So I'm going to ask 2 questions. And the 2 questions, if they can post on the Facebook group, if they do this, I'm going to ask about some personal things about individual members. So the first one I'd like to know is, does anybody know which member was joined by the Cheeky Girls on their stag do? And the second one, which member's father was arrested for the attempted assassination of Maggie Thatcher? Now, I know that it wasn't guilty of that at all, but I know that it did take place. So if anybody's actually listened to this, can they post the 2 names, obviously, on there? If somebody gets both names correctly, there will be a prize. And in terms of a draw, we'll have to think of some way of fiddling it. But would that be a good idea to do or not?
I think so, Brett. I think that's a very, very good place to start. I only know the answer to the second one. I don't know the answer to the first one.
See, most people know that one because I have mentioned that to some people in the past. But the first one could be quite interesting. It'd be interesting what people's thoughts are. So, okay, so I think we've got one last slide to go through, and I know that this one was a technology, but it's quite apt how we managed to purposely get my phone to ring in the background.
Yeah, and this, to be quite honest, this one's probably an obvious one because we all know this in day-to-day life. Because we're using technology, it's expect technology to fail, or the fact that, especially when you've got a large group of people on there will be some kind of user errors as well. And I'll keep this short and sweet because you just need to kind of have a backup plan, communicate your backup plan. And a good example of this is maybe what you and I did kind of yesterday. I produced this slide pack. I emailed it to you beforehand because that then covers 2 of the most probable failures. One, my broadband goes down halfway through me sharing my PowerPoint slide, or that there's a situation where we lose the ability for everybody to kind of have video and it switches just to audio. And in that case, you can email out the material and just talk people through it.
No, that's absolutely great. I mean, yesterday we had some little instances where cursors disappeared, etc., because we're just not used to it. But at the end of the day, I think even the great and the good this has happened to. I think one of the Prime Minister's conferences the other day, they had a problem with the microphones, and the sound quality was awful to start. And that's obviously addressing the nation with probably everybody watching. So little webinars, things there. Crikey, if they make mistakes, we're going to make mistakes, and things are going to go beyond control. So I think that's absolutely obviously a great point to make. And obviously the one little thing, obviously, which I want you to quickly mention as well, obviously as a thank you for taking your time for us, just quickly mention what you guys actually do. And then obviously, and also I think you've been helping some businesses as well at a ridiculously low price or something. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Brett. So yeah, my business, we create mobile apps and websites for small businesses. Um, you know, my vision is to really help small businesses kind of take on the big boys and not have to resort to apps like Just Eat and Amazon and all of those usual suspects. But one of the special offers I'm doing at the moment is for any business, particularly restaurants and grocery shops, that need to set up a very fast delivery service. So I'm offering a simple mobile app for taking orders, payments, and delivery details. And I'm doing that as a £99 one-off fee for a 4-month contract, and I'm keeping that offer open until the end of April. Just to put it in perspective, usually an app like that would cost about £1,500 to set up. So this is really just my business trying to help other small businesses that are having to pivot kind of survive over the next 4 months.
That's absolutely fantastic, Vidal. That's a great offer. I mean, I know how much apps cost in terms. Obviously, we've had one built. Yeah, I wish it was 1,500 quid because they can cost an awful lot more than that. So, obviously, well, thank you very much for your time, Daryl. I mean, there was a number of good questions posed last night, but I think we've got most of those covered off during this interview. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any other feedback at all you've had from other members, either after the event or during the event last night?
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything off, Brett, to be honest. Thank you.
That's absolutely brilliant. So just from me, obviously a massive thank you for obviously taking your time again to do this. We need to make a mental note of how to make sure we press record before we start the webinars. I don't particularly want to do all the chit chat we do beforehand for 20 minutes as people are logging on, etc. Just the main part. I think what I'm going to do is get a post-it note and stick it on the side of my computer.
I think Richard's idea of having it as the first agenda item was a good one.
Absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. So Daryl, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. If people got any questions, to either contact you directly or to post on the Facebook group, is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So once again, thank you very much for your time and I look forward to your response. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thanks, Brett. Cheers. Bye.